Hello YouTube world, Pretend Farmer here. Not a real farmer, just pretending. In today's video, we're going to talk about feeding your chickens grit. Why would you want to do such a thing? How much do you give them? Is it something you even need to do? When do you start? We're going to go over all of it. Let's get into it. As chickens are free ranging, they're going to naturally pick up small pebbles and little pieces of gravel that are going to go down to their gizzard and act as grit. So this is why you really don't need to supplement grit if you free range your chickens. What happens is that grit is going to set in their gizzard, and since chickens don't have teeth to chew their food, they're relying on that grit to kind of grind the food up for them as the muscles in their gizzard contract. It's important that they have plenty of grit in their gizzard, because if it's not there, then it'll cause the food to either pass right through and they won't get any nutrition out of it, or it can actually back up into their crop and the food just kind of starts to rot there because it's not being processed properly. That'll end up leading to either an impacted crop or a condition called sour crop. And those are two nasty things that you just really don't want to have to deal with as a chicken owner. So if you decide you do want to feed your chickens grit, here's how you do it. You take just a very, very small amount and you just mix it in with their feed. Here I've got a good healthy, about 1/4 of a 5-gallon bucket full. That's more than enough. Just that little bit that was in that jar is going to be all I put in their 15-pound feeder. Very, very minimal on this stuff. Now the simplest thing to do, if you don't want to mix it into your feed and worry about what ratio to go with, is just put it in a separate container. You can supplement oyster shells for calcium along with grit in separate containers aside from your main feed, and the chickens will kind of take what they need as they need it. They're smart like that. The only downside that I've found to this is a lot of times they end up getting in a fight playing with it. They sling it everywhere, knock the bowls over, they make a huge mess with it. It's just a real pain in the butt trying to get these separate containers anchored with the grit and the oyster shells in them. I found it's easier just to dose them every now and then with a little bit in their feed here on the Pretend Farm. And besides, my chickens are free ranging, so really there's not much need at all to give them grit. It's just something I do randomly ever so often, just as more of a precautionary measure than anything. Of course, oyster shells, most of your feed that's layer pellets or layer crumble is going to have enough calcium in it that you shouldn't have to supplement those. I've never had any problems with my chickens seeming like they're malnourished. So just a quick recap, free-range chickens are fine. They don't need grit. If they're confined to a run all day and they can't free range, you'll need to give them a little something, either separate in a separate container or mix some in with their feed. So there's one more thing we need to address. What if you've got little baby chicks that you just hatched or purchased and they're in a brooder? Do young chicks need grit? Well, if you go to your stores, you'll see tiny little bags of grit that's labeled chick grit. But I found it's not necessary to give it to them, at least not from the get-go. Most of your chick feed is water soluble, it's ground up real fine, and they're going to digest it perfectly fine without grit. It's not necessary. Now once your little chicks get old enough that they're considered pullets or cockerels, and they're out hanging with the big boys and girls, then yeah, you might want to go ahead at that point and mix in a little bit of chick grit with their feed, just to make sure that they're getting their nutrients. But as far as week-old chicks or something, don't think you have to dose them with a bunch of grit. Just give them the starter feed, they'll be fine. We're going to be hatching in just 1 or 2 days, so stay tuned here on the Pretend Farm, because we are going to have at least 10 new baby chicks, hopefully. They'll be in the brooder by the weekend, and we just love having new chickens here on the Pretend Farm, don't we? Until then, happy farming out there. This is the Pretend Farmer signing out.